Welcome back to Inclusive Design 24-2022, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters Intopia and Fable, and our Gold supporters Barrier Break, TPGI, and UX for the Win. You can follow us on Twitter at ID24Conf, and if you have any questions for the presenters, tweet them using the ID24 hashtag or post them in the YouTube chat for our Q&A at the end of the session. I'm joined by Jens. Over to you, Jens.
Thank you, Ian. Next, we'll have Annabelle Weiner and Courtney Benjamin talking about removing bias with Wizard of Oz screen reader usability testing. Over to you, Annabelle and Courtney.
Thank you. We are really excited to be talking with you about removing bias with Wizard of Oz screen reader usability testing. Thank you so much to ID24 for having us and for all of you for attending. My name is Annabelle, and I'm a UX accessibility specialist at Ally. So part of my job is making sure our projects and our design system consider accessibility from the start. And one of the ways that we're doing that is through user research with people with disabilities. And I'm a woman with long brown hair, and I'm wearing a pink shirt. And I'm presenting with Courtney, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Annabelle. My name is Courtney Benjamin, and I am a testing process analyst at Ally. So I oversee the testing best practices at Ally and assist with trainings, putting those together. I am also a female with long brown hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt.
Awesome, thank you. So to get started, one of our goals on the accessibility and the user experience team has been to conduct more early user research with people with disabilities. So we've been working with Fable, who's a sponsor of this recently, and Fable's a company that recruits people who use assistive technology for user research. And so we've been really excited because we've been able to conduct more usability studies with people who use alternative navigation, screen magnification, and screen readers, and we've learned a lot from doing that. And the reason we're doing this is because accessibility conformance does not guarantee a good user experience. So it's really important that we are meeting the web content accessibility guidelines, but we also want to reach past compliance and make sure we're giving a really good user experience to everyone who uses our products. And to do this, we need to make sure we're testing our designs with a wide range of participants. So one of the things that we were thinking about is how can we test screen reader usability before a site is actually developed? An issue we've been having is feeling like we need a site that's built out in HTML or an app that's already developed to be able to test with people who use screen readers. But if we wait until that point, then screen reader users, they're left out of giving their feedback early on. An issue with this is that it's a lot harder to change things once a site is built out and in code. We're more limited in the types of solutions that we can offer once the dev work is complete. But there's a lot more flexibility in solutions the earlier on we are in the process. So we turn to the Wizard of Oz method, and AnswerLab.com defines the Wizard of Oz method as a method where participants interact with a system that they believe to be autonomous, but in reality is controlled by an unseen human operator in the next room. It's a fantastic way to explore the experience of a complex responsive system before committing resources and development time to actually build that system. So on screen, there's a poster of the Wizard of Oz movie. But Wizard of Oz, it's a testing method that we've used at Ally to test with flows like voice assistants and chatbots, but we hadn't used it to test with screen readers before. And I got the inspiration for this idea from a talk I heard at AxCon in 2021 by Christine Hemphill and Tom Pakinko. And they were talking about conducting Wizard of Oz studies as early on as when you have a paper prototype with screen reader users. And I thought this was a really great idea and solution to some of the difficulties that we were facing with testing with screen reader users early on, because this way we wouldn't need a site that's built out yet. We would be able to test the information architecture, the content organization, all using our voice. So we could have someone on our team pretending to be the screen reader while participants voice their commands instead of using their keyboard. So to give you an idea of what this sounds like, I have a clip from one of our Wizard of Oz tests, and you're going to hear two voices. The first voice is the participant navigating through a prototype, voicing their screen reader command, so just saying out loud what they want to do. And then the second voice is the wizard or the human acting as the screen reader.
Okay. Start screen reader.
Ally logo. Go to snapshot. Link.
Stop the screen. I'd stop the screen reader speaking. I would then move to next heading.
Heading level 1. Snapshot.
Move to the next heading.
Heading level 2. Investment accounts.
So hopefully that gives you an idea of what the test actually sounds like in practice. But moving on to some benefits of Wizard of Oz testing, the most important one is that it improves accessibility before a project is in the development phase. So it saves time and money to make those updates early. And also, including screen reader users in early research, it's the right thing to do. Another benefit is that we've gotten really great feedback on content since participants are hearing each word. Sometimes we've noticed in user testing, sighted users, they may skim a prototype and look for the buttons or CTAs, but using this process, they're hearing every word. So we've gotten really good feedback on our content. Does it make sense? Do our button labels make sense? Do they need any additional context or a clearer label? And we've also gotten feedback on if we're using the appropriate components and roles. So sometimes someone might expect, a different component to be on the page as they're listening. And getting this information about what people are expecting and how components should be built is really helpful for us, especially as we're communicating that information to our development team, and especially because we're using a component library at Ally. So it's important that we get components, built appropriately from the start. And then we've also gotten information about, does our alt text contain enough detail? So alt text is something that we've been continuously trying to improve at Ally. And so it's been really helpful to be able to put those in front of people who hear alt text every day and get their feedback on it. Taking a step back to how we introduced the study to participants. So it was really important that we were setting the scene for them. So we told them that we have a partially functioning prototype. It's not a real site that's built out yet, but it's something that's in the early design phase. And we gave this context to really level set why we can't use a real screen reader with this process, because some participants were asking us, why can't I just use my screen reader? Why are we doing it this way? But when we told them the site wasn't built out yet, they really understood. So we asked them to voice how they would navigate on their phone or desktop, depending what we were testing. So they could say things like swipe forward, swipe backward, read forward, read backward, double tap, things like that. And then we let them know that they were going to hear feedback from the screen reader as they navigated through. We also asked if there were any gestures that they commonly use besides swipe forward, backwards, and double tap, because this way we could be prepared for that or for any hotkeys that they commonly use in the test. And then we also let them know they can ask us to repeat tasks or lines from the screen reader as often as they would like. And lastly, we just wanted to acknowledge that this might feel a little bit awkward. We know that this isn't a real screen reader and that screen readers are really customized to people's personal preferences. So we just wanted to acknowledge that. And then taking a look at how we built the test. So we've tried a couple of different methods for how we're building the test. And at first we started out with a lot of detail. And now as we're a little bit more comfortable, we can run a test without as much initial prep work on the prototype. But I partnered with Courtney, who you're going to hear from, and she's a screen reader expert. So when we were first working on this, we documented a lot of the screen reader language in a Word document. So on screen, there's a screenshot of a Word doc that lists out different headings, tables, landmarks, and links on a page. So we wanted to make sure it was really easy to jump to anything that a screen reader user might use their hotkeys for. So like headings and links were really important. And then as we kind of got started with practicing, we found it was easier for both the wizard and the moderator if the accessibility language was documented visually overlaying the prototype. So on screen, I have a screenshot of a really low fidelity desktop wireframe. There's a navigation, a couple of boxes to represent content and images, and also some buttons. And then there are red capital letters that document the accessibility annotations. So there are annotations for landmarks, heading levels, if something is a link or a button roll, if there's alt text. And so we wanted to make sure that the language was generic enough so it could sound like VoiceOver or NVDA based on what people's preferences were. And it was important to us that we made sure we were voicing the name, role, and value for everything on the page. And then another method we tried out was using Adobe XD as kind of a soundboard instead of having a human act as the screen reader. So using Adobe XD, which is a prototyping tool, we could program speech playback events to sound more like a screen reader. So this way it would sound a little bit more robotic. We would have less human errors. And so I have a screenshot of Adobe XD. We're in the prototyping tab, and there's a big block of text that says interest checking, and there's a box around it, and that box has a speech playback event. And the speech that it's going to read if someone clicks it is interest checking heading level 1. So basically you can type in any language there, but we just used it as a space to type in what a screen reader would read. So I'm going to play another audio clip for you. You're going to hear the first voice, which is the participant who's voicing their screen reader commands. And then the second is Adobe XD acting as the screen reader.
Next.
Available balance, select to define, $100.
Let's go to the next element.
Current balance, select to define, $100.
And next element.
Interest year to date, $2.
Next.
Annual percentage yield, 3.62%.
Next element.
Account details, button collapsed.
And let's expand that one, please.
Account details, button expanded.
So with this process, you still need to have someone who's navigating the prototype and clicking the hotspots based on what participants are voicing. It's really great for mimicking what a screen reader sounds like, but it can be time consuming to set up the prototype, write out all of the screen reader language, but it can be helpful if you're getting started with Wizard of Oz testing, or if you want to test an experience and make sure it really mimics what a screen reader sounds like. But as our team has become more comfortable with being the wizard and identifying elements on the page in real time, we haven't needed to do as many annotations or using Adobe XD. Sometimes there's still a bit of human error when we're, acting as the screen reader, but we found participants are really forgiving because they know that we're, not a real screen reader. So I'm going to pass it to Courtney to talk about what it was like to be the wizard.
Thank you, Annabelle. So as Annabelle mentioned, we did this study in 2 different ways. And that first way was with my human voice acting as the screen reader. And then that second way was with the Adobe XD prototype and that more robotic sounding voice. So when we first tried this out with my human voice as the screen reader, I just needed to be really mindful of my tone and my clarity, how quickly I was speaking, and to really try and take on that robotic persona of a screen reader that I listen to on a daily basis for my testing. And we also noticed that some participants preferred the say all command. And that's where when you land on a page, the entire page content will read off until they stop it, pause it from reading. And so once we started picking that up, that was a preferred command, we tried out recording my voice reading through the whole page. So then we could go ahead and press play when the users did request that, so that my voice wouldn't get as tired reading through the whole page over and over again. But we definitely found that as a great finding. And then, of course, along the way, we'll move on to the next slide here for unplanned scenarios. So along the way with any new study, you're going to come up with, some surprises. And so there was definitely happy paths taken, those most commonly taken routes to accomplish a task. But there were definitely a lot of unexpected routes taken as well, because when you give a group of folks a task, they're going to complete it in their own way, however they interpret that to get to that end goal. So that was definitely something we encountered. So really just practicing for a bunch of different possibilities of maybe buttons that folks might be clicking on or pages that they would go through in order to get to that end goal. And it was okay if they did click on something that we hadn't yet included in our prototype. We would simply pause them and ask for clarification. And the same thing if they were to request a very specific key command that was either, we weren't prepared for or something we just couldn't really simulate, we would just ask them for clarification. And that also gave us a lot of great feedback as to what they had expected that command to do or how they wanted to interact with that part of the design. So there's definitely no one size fits all path for accomplishing a task, we found. And then challenges as the wizard for our next slide here. So again, with any new study, we had some obstacles that presented themselves. So there's of course different hotkey possibilities. And so that would be like between the different screen readers. If NVDA had a certain command and then VoiceOver might have a slightly different way to engage that command. So just kind of preparing myself for those. And in doing so, there is an NVDA expert certification, which really prepares you for those different key commands. And so I did go through that process of taking the exam and getting that certification so that I was better prepared for the different combinations and commands that might be asked. And users were, of course, able to voice their commands in different ways. So one way would be, like insert F7, or they could simply ask, move to the next heading. And so there was a variety of ways that they could interact with the screen reader. And then I definitely needed to switch between listening for participants' commands, whether they were asking, okay, move to the next element, move to the next heading, and differentiating when they were then having a dialogue and they wanted feedback, they wanted to ask a question. And when that happened, Annabelle would jump in as the moderator and have that dialogue with them so that we could keep Annabelle as the moderator and then myself as the screen reader to keep that differentiation and make it a little easier for the participants to distinguish who is the screen reader voice and then who is there to talk them through it. And then we did have a participant or two who weren't quite as comfortable voicing their screen reader commands, which is expected because this is brand new and none of our participants had tried this before. It was also our first time. So with those participants who weren't quite as comfortable, we would walk them through it and present them with some suggestions. Like you could say this, you could say move to next heading. And when you do that, then the screen reader would read off like this. So we would give them some examples, walk them through it, and they did get the hang of it and we were able to accomplish what we were looking for. And then challenges, so just some general study challenges or some unexpected feedback that we got was we received some very specific, detailed feedback on the screen reader responses, like how the screen reader was voicing out. So for example, here we have $2.30 on the page. So the Adobe XD prototype or my voice might read it out like $2.30, but a screen reader user, one of the participants, was expecting it to read out the decimal point. So to call out $2 decimal point 30 or 30 cents. And so just little formatting inconsistencies where they were expecting it to read out slightly different. We did get a lot of feedback on that. With the human voice, with my own voice, they were a bit more forgiving, knowing that it was coming from a human and that it wasn't actually a screen reader. But with the Adobe XD prototype, it's very robotic sounding and actually very similar sounding to a screen reader, as you just heard. With the recording. So folks were a little more quickly to jump out and raise their hand on that when they heard it not quite matching up in detail, how they would hear it coming from their own screen reader. And then as a second challenge here was the time to create and practice for the test. So if you're ever to replicate it, it does take time, especially with your first and maybe your second run-throughs with the study, just to kind of get it all set up. Now, whether you're using the Adobe prototype with that, it will take a little bit of time to map out, annotate, and link all of those parts of the prototype. And then if you choose to do the human voice version, you would just want that screen reader, the person acting as a screen reader, to really familiarize themselves with the pages, the flows, and the patterns that they would be voicing out. So that's really where the time aspect comes into play. And you certainly want to run through some practice sessions before jumping into it with the real participants. And then as a third challenge, there were, of course, some limitations where we either were unable to replicate or it was inconvenient to replicate. So if there was a very specific key command that was voiced out, like an insert F7, reading off all the links while we're halfway through the page, we could always just pause the participant and ask them, is this a typical command that you use? How often do you use it? And what were you expecting to happen here? We could take you to the next link, things like that. So just kind of working with them, and it is okay to pause and ask for clarification if needed. And then as a final challenge here of the study was we couldn't replicate very custom screen reader settings. So being maybe accent or speed, tone and pitch, and these users have their screen readers set up for a very specific way so that they're able to recognize their screen readers in they have these custom settings where it works best for them every single day as they use it. And so those aren't necessarily things that we could replicate in this prototype study, but we do have a quote here from a participant to better tell this part of the story. So the quote reads, "People who use screen readers are very used to their screen reader and the certain voice and rate. And so Courtney did a great job. It's just a little interesting. It kind of threw me off my game listening to someone else read it for me because I have all of my settings adjusted. I can go faster or slower, but I understand this is just a prototype right now. And so that's the way we have to do it." So they were very understanding, but we did find that towards the beginning of the study, participants were a bit slower to voice their commands, a little bit more apprehensive before they really got into it. But they were definitely able to use our new version of their screen reader. So then we have some general takeaways. So our learnings from the study, what did we pull out of it? So definitely preparing for non-happy paths. So the happy paths, those most commonly taken routes, those are the easiest to prepare for because you have in your mind kind of, okay, we think they're going to click this button. We think this is how, they would make a deposit, for example, and we have in our mind what someone might do, but you also want to prepare yourselves for situations where someone might be going into a table and that might not be like what you thought they would do, but they might go into a table and then they might go to 4 different pages or try to before they end up at that end page. So preparing for those situations. And if it's something that you don't want to include in your prototype, it's not built out, that is okay to pause them and let them know this component or this page is not yet built out, but what were you expecting to happen when you clicked on that page? So still validating that decision and still getting feedback and information from that directional choice that they made, and pulling information out of that is still helpful. And then we have another takeaway here, which is that the majority of the participants were able to pick up the concept fairly easily. So like I mentioned, that first task, sometimes a bit slower for the participants so that they could ease into it, get more comfortable. And again, no one had ever done this before, like used a simulated screen reader. So it was cool to see them pick up on it very quickly. Yeah, the majority of them were able to run with it seamlessly. And we did receive feedback that they felt very valued as being part of the study and being able to give their feedback so early on before this was even built out. And then as our third takeaway here and our final takeaway, we have a lot of benefits came out of having a separate wizard and moderator. So when you separate out who's going to respond to the actual commands, and then having someone take on interjecting questions, note-taking, that really helps streamline the process from both the study perspective, who's running the study, it's easier to divide it that way. And then it's also easier for the participant, we found, to have those two voices differentiated for them. And it really helped in this case that Annabelle has a strong UX research background. So she was able to pull that in being the moderator. And then myself, I have a screen reader testing background. So that definitely came in handy in responding to their keyboard commands. And now Annabelle's going to talk through some of the insights that we gathered from testing.
Thanks, Courtney. So we wanted to give you an idea of some of the feedback we've received from testing. So the first one is component roles. So I mentioned this earlier, but we got feedback about if component roles make sense given the context and content of the page. So an example of this is that sometimes participants expected their next read to be a button instead of a checkbox, for example. Or they would have rather had an open input field instead of a select list. So getting this information early on about what components or roles people were expecting was helpful for us to know. And then alt text. So we've been getting feedback on our alt text for when we're using illustrations, but also images of people. So we've just been collecting information about how much detail to include, how much is too much, when should something be decorative. So we're continuously working on improving our alt text standards, but it's great to get opinions from people who hear alt text every day. And then content and calls to action. So we've received really great feedback on what's clear and what needs more explanation. So sometimes when we're using conversational language, we might get some questions about what a certain word means. And then with calls to actions and buttons, sometimes a button, it may be really clear to a sighted user because of its visual placement on the page. But sometimes for screen reader users, a button that just says update, it might need a little bit more context about what are they actually updating. Headings. So clear headings are really important, as we've mentioned. We noticed a lot of screen reader users hop between different headings to kind of scan the page and get an idea of what to expect. It's something we've noticed in every screen reader test that we've done. So here's a clip that one of our participants was very generous and said we could share with you all about how he uses headings.
So, I mean, the thing I always mention about using a screen reader, right, is when I'm looking at when I bring up a page, it's almost as that nothing exists on the page, right? It's almost as a blank page until I start just reading stuff with the screen reader, and that's when I know. But really, I felt like I was able to go through and kind of guess where things might be. I know I did a little more investigating, but I always double check sometimes with pages with headings. Because sometimes the heading I think, first heading I come across, I think, okay, this might be it. But sometimes they might have something more specific. So I'll double check sometimes by going back.
So the thing that stood out to us here is how he said a page is blank until he starts listening to the headings. So making sure that you have really clear heading labels, that's important for usability. And then last one is saving manually versus automatically. So some pages have a feature where it saves automatically. Some require you to manually save. We've heard this is confusing for sighted users as well sometimes, but for screen reader users, it's really important to ensure there's clear content or some type of announcement to confirm what has been saved or if they need to take additional action to save something. So moving on to a few tips if you're interested in creating a Wizard of Oz test. And the first one is prioritize testing on pages with new patterns. So at the beginning, it does take some time to set the test up. So it's really important to think about which pages would be the most beneficial to test, because you probably won't be able to do this test on all new projects you have. And we found this method to be really helpful when we're testing a new pattern that's going to go into our design system. So for example, if you're building a new auto-suggest pattern, testing the functionality on one project will help to extend those findings on all other projects that use the same pattern. The next is that landmarks, headings, and links are really important. So we found a lot of participants use their hotkeys to hop between these. So make sure that as the wizard, you're ready to hop to the next heading or the next link when a participant asks for it. And then ask participants about their basic screen reader preferences. So we know that we can't mimic their screen reader exactly, but we can try to set up a couple things to make it a little bit more personalized to their preferences and settings. So Courtney mentioned this, but be prepared to read everything on the page until a participant tells you to stop, or read one element at a time. Just ask them what their preference is. And then we can also ask which hotkeys or gestures they use the most often, so we can be prepared for them in a test. So these are things to kind of ask before you get started. And then be flexible. You'll likely go back and forth between having a conversation with participants and having them voice their key commands. And this is what you want. You really want to get their feedback and hear everything that they're thinking. And so as a moderator, you might just need to guide them on when it's time to transition to having them voice their screen reader commands again. And then lastly, if you have some time, it's really helpful to practice with someone who isn't familiar with the prototype or project. It could be someone on a different testing team or a QA team. And if practicing with a sighted user, ask them to dim their screen so that they're just hearing the information for the first time. They're not seeing the prototype on the screen. And make sure that you're testing with someone who knows how to use a screen reader. But this will help you to just get comfortable with the test and also to find unhappy paths that you might need to prepare for. And we just want to end on how this has helped us to partner with the research team. So we've started asking teammates from our CX research team to help facilitate these tests. And so in this way, Courtney or I, we can be the wizard and then have someone on the CX team who might be a little bit less familiar with accessibility. They can moderate the tests, but they don't have to have all of that technical screen reader knowledge. So we've helped the CX team with adjusting their test scripts so that they can facilitate these sessions. So making sure we're reviewing the scripts and adjusting some of the instructions and language to make sure it's appropriate for screen reader users. So making sure that we're saying things like you'll hear this instead of you'll see this in the prototype. And then we've done one practice session with them, as we mentioned before, just to get comfortable with the test. But this has been really great because it allows more people on our team to learn about accessibility and kind of work with people with disabilities. And it also makes sure that our CX team is conducting their research with a more representative group of users. So we really hope that this is something that you might be able to add into your process so you can ensure accessibility is at the forefront of your practice as well. So thank you all so much for attending and for your time, and we wanted to open it up for questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I know we've got some questions, so Jens, over to you, and Annabelle and Courtney.
Thanks a lot for this talk. I've never heard of this technique before. Very interesting. For example, for the idea testing the screen readers just before a screen reader could read aloud something. That's a nice idea. We had some questions from YouTube. One was from the user UX for the win. How does the team ensure that the screen reader will actually say what we said while pretending during testing? I understand it that way. Do you check the developer's work in the end?
That's a great question. Courtney, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so we get as close as we possibly can to what the screen reader would say when it's actually running. And we get that from how a screen reader acts presently. And so let's say there is a button, for example, and it says login button, and we know that we could test that on our site and we know how that reads, then we are going to read that off the exact same way when we're reading it off in our prototype in our study. So we take as much as we can from known experiences from screen readers, and then we just bring them right into our testing and when we are mimicking that screen reader to make it as accurate as possible. But of course, I'm sure that there would be, little differentiations every now and then with wording and depending on the screen reader that you're using and preferences set up. But that's a great question. We try to get as close as we can to how accurate it would be.
And just to add on to that, if they were asking how we make sure the development team is actually taking that feedback that we've got. So we make sure that we're documenting our accessibility findings, and we work with the UX team to kind of create accessibility annotations. And then it's a responsibility of our testing team to kind of make sure the dev team is catching all of these accessibility annotations. So it's something that's built into our process to make sure our findings are really getting incorporated into the final product.
So you do have a separate testing team, which ensures that that the end result is near to the conception, to the idea.
Exactly. Yeah, we have a testing team that tests with multiple screen reader and browser combinations once the site is in development.
We do have another question from our YouTube channel from Thomas Logan. What were surprising or unexpected key commands that you learned through your studies?
Yeah, a lot of them were search commands. So they were specific ways that individuals wanted to search throughout the page. So that we just don't use in our testing. So that's where it caught us by a little bit of a surprise. So it was listing out all of the links on the page and then going through them. And then they wanted to choose a link after hearing them all listed out. You could do that with buttons, for example. So a lot of them were ways in which they wanted to search.
So how many different screen readers did you do your research? Because there are so many different screen readers and so many different ways to interact with them. 2 must be enough, or?
Yes, so we do go based off of the most commonly used screen readers for desktop and then also mobile. So for desktop, we went off of NVDA commands and then also VoiceOver. And then JAWS is also very similar. So those 3, I should say, those 3 screen readers, I test with those on a daily basis. And so incorporating those 3 into our prototype and preparing for those commands. And then for mobile, that was a bit easier with just iOS and VoiceOver or TalkBack and VoiceOver. So preparing for those 2. So we go based off of the most commonly used screen readers.
And then for this test, obviously there are different, keyboard commands for different screen readers, but we tried to keep the language somewhat generic. And we found that participants, if their preferred screen reader was NVDA versus VoiceOver, they didn't really notice a ton of differences versus like how we were pretending to be the screen reader. So we tried not to have like super specific screen readers for the actual Wizard of Oz testing that we were doing.
Yeah, I will say that we found a lot of participants just preferred to give direction, for example, next element, next link, next button, as opposed to saying which letter on the keyboard they would press. So, you know, B for button or tab, shift tab. So we did get those commands sometimes, but a lot of the participants chose to just say, you know, next element or next component, you know, move forward. And so we got a variety of interactions there.
Just in is a question from Dasha. How much time would it take to set up a test like this? How does that compare to the time it would take to fix issues after the product has been developed?
That's a good question. So I will say at the beginning, it did take us some time because we wanted to get it perfect. So yeah, Courtney and I spent like several hours kind of practicing, and it took some time to document the accessibility annotations on the prototype. Now I would say we have just been maybe doing a 1-hour practice session with people, and we haven't been doing as many annotations. So we found that we can do this process with a really quick turnaround time, which is great after we've gotten comfortable with it. So I think for now, doing this at the beginning, it definitely takes a lot less time than fixing once things are in development, because I know that that can take a lot longer and cost the team a lot more money if they have to change things once the site is built out.
And it's much better not to dig into the holes, not to produce the holes that you have to fill afterwards.
That's right.
Exactly.
We had a interesting question from Twitter, via Twitter from Grunet. Would it be possible to have the moderator be a disabled person familiar with the same assistive technology as the participant? Not sure if that would make any sort of difference, just a thought.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I think that would definitely be possible as long as, you know, the wizard is familiar with the prototype. I think anyone could do it.
Maybe it's more difficult to describe the prototype.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we've been looking at a visual prototype, and it might be something where we need to type out the content of the prototype in a Word document instead. So I'm sure there are a lot of different ways to kind of solve for that.
And I guess XD is not compatible for screen readers.
Unfortunately, no. We have been excited to test out Figma, which has a beta version for screen readers, but it's something we still need to explore, but not Adobe XD.
Yeah, Adobe Figma.
Yeah.
There are so many differences between several screen readers. Do you focus on 1 or 2, 4? By creating your playbook, how a screen reader would act? Or do you have, let's say, 4 or 5 playbooks and always take this special playbook because the participant is an NVDA and not a JAWS user?
Yeah, there's one playbook, and so that is combining all of the different commands and ways you can move around the page. So whether you're using a voice or the Adobe XD prototype, you know, you can only move around. You can go forward, you could go backwards, you could go to headings, and things like that. And then someone would be controlling it, like controlling that Adobe XD prototype, like clicking where on the prototype it would announce, or then, yeah, using their voice if you did the human voice. But similar to the other question is, yeah, we're accounting for all of the most commonly used screen readers, and they all are able to explore pages similarly. So you can go to headings and you can go to main landmarks and buttons and links and forwards and backwards with all of the screen readers. And so that is really what we focused on. And then any of the specific commands that were announced are based off of myself studying those different commands and familiarizing myself with them so that if and when they were announced, I would know exactly what to do in that situation. But you could always pause and ask the participant what they intended for that command to do. And then again, a lot of times participants liked to just say, move forward, next element, backwards, let's go to the next button, instead of voicing the actual keys that they would press. So a little bit of both.
I'm not a screen reader user myself. I'm just sometimes testing for it. And I'm always struggling with finding enough information, how they work, what they like, what they ignore. And do you have a ton of information, or was it a struggle to find the informations you needed, and maybe tables of informations about what screen reader A does and B does not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find that the best way for myself to learn it is through practicing. And so really just playing around with those screen readers. So once you have them downloaded, just playing around with them. And of course, there are lots of helpful cheat sheets out there on like hot keys, different key commands you can use. NVDA, that is a great screen reader. It's a free screen reader, which makes it so popular. And that one has a lot of great tutorials and handbooks on digital assets on what the different commands would do. So yes, there's a lot of information out there on the web to sort through, but NVDA has a whole bunch of information. That's probably where I got the majority of mine. And then also from just playing around, there's also a lot of great YouTube videos out there as well, from, real users depending on those screen readers to navigate the web, showing you what they're doing and how they're moving around.
And I'll just add to that, yeah, we can like practice and look for as much information about like hotkeys and shortcuts as we can, but we're never going to be as expert of a screen reader user as someone who uses a screen reader every day. So I think it's really great to learn from people who are, using them every day, which is one of the reasons we're doing this research.
One last interesting question. Was the screen reader wizard in the same room as the participant or behind a one-way mirror?
So all of this happened over Zoom. So we're always in different rooms from everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was an interesting piece for us because Annabelle and I hadn't run studies through Zoom yet. It was more so at the start of COVID and everyone was moving to Zoom. And so we were testing out those waters with having participants join into the Zooms using their screen readers, which sometimes proved a little bit challenging because it was new for everyone at that time. But yeah, we did it all through Zoom.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yes, we have asked you all the questions that occurred. I'm handing over to you, Ian.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Annabelle and Courtney. That was fantastic. A lot of great questions there and even better answers. And thank you to you, Jens, as well. You've been with us the last couple of hours and been a great host for these sessions. So thank you so much. If you liked this session, hit that YouTube like button, and don't forget you can subscribe to youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 to be kept in the loop on any of our future events. A reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with thanks to our supporters: Intopia, Fable, Barrier Break, TPGI, UX for the Win, Equal Entry, InfoAxia, Intuit, the Law Office of Lenny Feingold, Adrian Roselli LLC, and WebAble. We will be back on the hour with our next session, where Malcolm Glenn will be talking to us about Beyond the Water's Edge, integrating DEI into orgs' external facing work. I hope to see you then.